We'll just give it a few moments just to see how many people. We've had 80 people for the last session, or the first session, been another 70 plus. Oh, well done, Sarah. You've done all 3 sessions. Well done. Much appreciated. It's good. It's hot as well. Hopefully you're in a park or something like that. Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you've got involved. Oh, makeshift office. Good work. That's all good. That's all good. Okay, we'll give it a few more moments, and then just let us know how we're sounding. Give us a hands up. All good. Raise hand. Brilliant. On point. I like that. Fantastic. Fantastic. We'll give it a few more moments, and then we'll crack in. So far, the 2 sessions that we've had today, how to engage with young people virtually, as with Laura Price from Abianda, really great session, just some of her own experiences with the young people that she's working with. And then the second session that we had was gender, young people and COVID-19, with Laura again, Ebenita and Talia as well. And again, great session. These guys just really opened it up to some of the challenges working with different young people, or young people from a gender perspective, which is great. All these will be online in the next couple of days. So if you missed out, you didn't really miss out, because you're going to get to see it online. So great. I think we'll start, because I want to kind of just get as much in. So basically, once again, welcome to our conference, which is all about COVID-19, isolation and young people. This conference has been able to happen due to the City Bridge Trust. Power to Fight, we are a charity which empowers communities to end youth violence. And one of the ways that we do that is workshops and conferences like this, where we try to bring as many people together, shared experiences, and hopefully this can help you be more empowered in your context. And just a couple of housekeeping rules before I get the panelists to introduce themselves, is that once again, if you've got questions, I'd just encourage you just to put them in the Q&A at the bottom. And anybody who is abusive or bad language or anything like that will kick you out. But so far, we've not had any of those problems, so I don't anticipate that's going to be an issue. I just want to basically, today, this session is all about partnership work. And I appreciate that many of you may well be practitioners. And obviously when COVID hit, you're face-to-face, the way you engage maybe with your local authority, or I don't know, grant funders, or even if you're in different institutions that might well be PRUs or schools, some of you might be working in YOYs or whatever it may be, has changed. So what I wanted to do is try and get some people who I respect highly and I trust, and who have got years and skin in the game, just to share their experiences of how they've maintained doing partnership work. And hopefully what we're going to do is it's going to be a little bit of a different session to what we've done previously. I'm just going to interview these guys, because I think all of them could do a session 2-3 hours themselves. So I'm going to try and be the guy who keeps it to a nice 45-minute session. And then obviously you guys can then answer any questions. So if you guys like to unmute yourselves, and brilliant. I will get these guys to introduce themselves. So Lib, would you like to just introduce yourself first, who you are, what you're about?
Great, okay. Well, thank you very much, Ben. I feel really pleased to be able to take part in this today. I'm Lib Peck, and I've been the director of the London Violence Reduction Unit for just over a year, really. The Violence Reduction Unit was set up by the Mayor of London, but it's very much a partnership approach. I'm very pleased that Ben sits on the partnership reference board that guides its work, and it's really trying to look at how you can galvanise and bring together different public sector organisations, but absolutely at the heart of it to try and empower communities and work with them to see not only a reduction in violence, but also an increase in people's feelings of safety. And young people have to be at the heart of that, driving that change. And we've tried to make them the kind of core of our strategy through the work that we've done with them. So it's obviously based on a long-term preventative approach as well. And I think that's really important, that kind of early intervention and trying to stop people and stop places and stop society in a way fueling violence. And that's a much longer term approach.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Liv. Derek, would you like to just introduce yourself, who you are, what you're about?
Hi everyone, and thank you for having me here. My name's Bardowell. I'm an author and philanthropy advisor. I've worked in funding for the last 10 years at Esme Fairbairn, Laureate Sport for Good, and the National Lottery Community Fund. And I guess just one of my reflections, very much when I was running the UK portfolio there, we've moved very much towards partnerships. Primarily, most of the grants we were making were partnerships, and they weren't sort of funder-led partnerships. It wasn't that kind of masquerade top-down. It was organizations that were coming to us and very much saying, this is what we do well, but we need to be working with other parts of the system, not just the charitable parts, but also private and public sectors to be really effective. So, effective examples of that, I would say, would be like Black Thrive in Lambeth, who we funded, as well as the Contextual Safeguarding Network, which you would look at as really prime examples of not only systemic change, but also just really strong partnership working across multiple stakeholders. So yeah, that's me.
Really helpful. And your book came out last year, and the hardback has just come out as well, right?
Yeah, so yeah, paperback's just come out last couple of months. So yeah, No Win Race, which I can actually see behind me. So yeah, that's me.
It's always good. Good advertising, mate. It's important. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Derek. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Andre, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Ben. So I'm Andrez Harriott. I'm the, Chief Exec and founder of the Liminality Group. We specialize in providing services across secure training centers, young offender institutions, for young people who are serving, short to very lengthy custodial sentences. We deliver bespoke offending behavior programs, CPD training for prison staff and governors, as well as access to employment for children returning home from custody. We also work within a community context, specifically with children who are most at risk of being excluded from school, because we know once they're excluded from school, they're 1 or 2 steps away from custody. So that's really the primary task of our organisation. I'm a criminologist, I'm a sociologist, I'm an organisational consultant, and I've known Ben for the best part of 15 plus years. We spent nearly a decade together in the Lewisham Youth Offending Service, and I am really committed to working with the most high risk, high vulnerability and high harm young people. It's the top echelons who really can cause the most harm. So that's where we specialize.
Really helpful. Thank you so much. Right, guys, let's get into it. And I suppose one of the things I just want to kind of one of the first questions really would be, in this time of COVID, how have you managed to maintain those key stakeholder relationships? And you've all expressed how the type of relationships you have, different contexts, whether it's young people, Lib, in your context, it's wide reaching. And Derek, you've obviously spoken a little bit about the grant connections. So how have you managed to, if we in our field, when we talk about the youth sector, relationship and partnership is really important. So how have you managed to maintain those relationships in this time? And I'm happy. I don't mind who wants to go first on that one.
I'll jump in if that's all right. So we at the moment, we are working with children who are being released from custody. There are many children who are coming home. They've pretty much been in isolation during quarantine, spending increased amounts of time within their cells or their rooms. And they're now coming back into the community and going back into homes. And again, experiencing this quarantine experience. So we're trying to support them as they come home, chair many of the multi-agency meetings that need to happen post-custody, ensuring that everyone's playing the role they should be to try and support the child, but also recognizing that all of us, including our partners and our key stakeholders, are in this period of crisis, this period of post-COVID crisis, this period of post-George Floyd crisis, whereas organizations, everybody is kind of, thinking about how they're going to re-emerge. So we're just trying to make sure that we're there, keeping ourselves visible, keeping the conversations going, but ensuring that everybody's doing what they can for the children who are coming home.
Yeah, great. Really helpful. Lib, would you like to come in?
Well, I think first, just as an observation, it is quite amazing how people have adapted, actually, and we're not frontline service practitioners, as you mentioned, Ben. Ours is much more of a kind of partnership role, trying to sort of support community initiatives, particularly try and support youth work, but also try and engage with different sectors within the, you know, the public sector. And, you know, you sit in organisations, don't you, and talk, or I have anyway, previously been in organisations where they talk about developing a digital strategy over a 2 to 3 year period, and everybody's literally just had to get on with it. And I think that's a real testament actually to the way people have worked and the determination that I see. I mean, how we've done it, I think you've got to rely on those conversations and making sure that you are critically listening. You know, we heard concerns very quickly about the, you know, we'll probably come on to some of the issues, but, you know, sort of a digital division. You know, the haves and the have-nots, the concerns around flexibility of funding, listening to that, and then trying to organise around that seems to me to be really key. And making sure that those kind of partnership arrangements, where appropriate, you know, are still in existence. So the kind of workshops like we're doing now virtually with our local authority colleagues, or the workshops that we're doing with some of the community organisations that we fund, keeping those kind of partnerships going just in a different way, but also being a bit realistic. I mean, you know, the two of the big public sector agencies we want to work with are education and health, and you know, it's only recently we've started another conversation with health, really, because, you know, understandably I work very closely with Martin Griffiths, who's the clinical lead in the NHS for violence reduction. You know, he had other priorities over the last few months, so you know, working out where it's appropriate to have the conversations, listening to what people are saying and trying to act as flexibly, I think, as you can.
Yeah, really, and really helpful in terms of flexibility and not going at the same pace that you would have done prior to lockdown, to COVID. I think is a really important point to draw out, actually, because I think initially, for me anyway, I probably thought I could probably still go at the same pace, and then you realise that's not going to work, actually. Really, really helpful. Derek?
So I guess for me it's slightly different, because I've been working, like, I'm a founding member of an organisation called Future Foundations UK, which is a group that primarily supports minoritized racial groups who work in the funding sector. And so, you know, most of the funders that you will know of, we will have members who we've been supporting over the last, you know, couple of years or so. And what happened is that we very much went from being a kind of discrete affinity group to really noticing that money wasn't getting to communities from funders, and really starting to play that role of listening to communities. So we were hearing what groups were saying to us, and what we ended up doing was sort of coming out from, you know, being this affinity group and this quiet group to essentially say, well, we've got to advocate for the frontline groups, largely because we have that privilege of sitting around the table with a number of those funders. So we just went on this massive kind of listening exercise and just really said, whatever power and privilege that we've got at this particular point to try and influence from within those systems, that's what we're going to do. And to that end, we've just been working with a number of grassroots groups and organizations, really been, when we've had the opportunity, get them into the room, and if we're in that room, just being able to advocate for things that they want. And I think, you know, some of those clear bits for us has been that, you know, delivery of work or grant making through that race equity lens, very much really trying to get funders to build infrastructure again, particularly for Black and brown communities, and really ensuring that that's one of the key things. And also just looking at, I guess, the innovation, because there's a lot of pain right now. And I feel that pain. I think everyone that's on this call will feel that pain. But there's also a piece here where people are really thinking on their feet, mobilizing, innovating, and doing some things that a number of funders won't be used to. And so for us, we're like, well, that's a positive. That's telling you what we as communities always do when times are really hard. If this is the new normal, then some of the things that people are innovating is also the new normal. So it's really been listening and advocating and playing that type of role.
Yeah, again, really, really helpful just to hear how to adapt and the new normal. And I think this brings me on to the next question about some of the challenges, because we've got to also appreciate we're in a different world. We're in a I can't even say we're post-COVID, because we're still in COVID, you know. So it's like, let me not go too far ahead of the game, but we're in this situation where we don't quite know what the world is going to look like by the end of the year, maybe in the three months. So I imagine that would be a challenge, but we're also in this post George Floyd world as well. And that brings its own set of challenges to how we are now doing partnership work and where that spotlight kind of shines. So I suppose the question is really not just about those two things in particular, but what are some of the challenges you guys have faced? And yeah, if you want to bring in, like, you know, when we talk about COVID-19 and the disproportionality that we know it impacts Black and brown communities, and we know I heard one politician say the disease is racist. We know that's not what it is. We know it's not that, but we also know the impact it is having on poorer communities, specifically Black and brown. But yeah, just around your challenges, what have you found which has been challenging in this time? Andre, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I think really for us, it's been the work we do in schools. You know, children are obviously they're everywhere at the moment. The most vulnerable children are still going to the schools that we work in, but primarily there's many children just on the street. And you're finding teachers having to almost adopt the role of a social worker, going out and visiting the homes of children and providing food packs, you know, supporting the children who have parents who may be suffering from various mental health issues. So I think the role of a teacher, it's always been quite diverse, but at the moment that it's more on the welfare side, whilst these children are in the community or at home. So some of the challenges we face is just generally getting children to engage, keeping them online, keeping them on the phone, ensuring that they have a private space to be able to be honest and open about what's going on for them. And then when we think about the children that we work with in a custodial setting, we haven't really been able to go and see the children. Yesterday was the first time we stepped into custody in 10 weeks. And the children literally were just overwhelmed that we were able to come in and see them. But they've pretty much been, you know, experiencing this, you know, with the incredible staff that look after them. They've been on their own. They're not able to have visits from family, although there have been some virtual visits, etc. But that compounded, you know, with the sentences that they're serving, various mental health conditions which could be being triggered by them being in isolation for so long. These are some of the challenges that we're experiencing when we work on the ground or when we work with the children. I think from an organizational perspective, like I said before, many of our key stakeholders and partners, there's so much changing for them around, you know, government guidelines with regards to when people can get back into the office, you know, redesigning their offices, just thinking about what their organization is going to look like moving forward. Do they need to have an office? Will people be at home? So there's so much going on. And what we're trying to do as an organization is just position ourselves. So one, we can provide, which we are, diversity and inclusion training post George Floyd, because again, so many organizations are struggling with the uncomfortable conversations. But then also ensuring, as I said before, that we're visible and we're there to support. So when we do come out of this, people know who to contact, who specializes in what, you know, roles. And thankfully, we can continue to do the incredible work that we do with some of the most vulnerable children.
Yeah, really helpful. Like, really interesting that you stepped in only yesterday after 10 weeks. What's some of the fallout from the young people who you're working with? What, obviously they're happy to see you, but you may or may not have seen a massive difference in their demeanor and things like that. So what's some of the fallout that you've seen in that time of isolation for them?
I mean, unfortunately, there's been levels of violence. There's been attacks against staff in some institutions. We have to remember the adolescents. So if they're sitting in their cell for many, many hours a day, when they are released, that energy has to come out somewhere. That doesn't condone the behavior, but we have seen an increase in attacks against staff. There's self-harming happening, which has been quite acute for those children who are really struggling on their own at the moment. But then on a positive, I must say on a positive, all of the organizations, including people at HMPPS, are working really proactively to give the children things to do, giving them packs so they can, you know, be entertained, ensuring they're more flexible on some of the restrictions that are normally placed, ensuring they're more responsive around behavior, not being as punitive as they may have been in the past. They're thinking that these are children in a really difficult time. Let's try and be more rehabilitative or more therapeutic in our approach whilst they're going through this. So, you know, I always say the children that we work with in custody, they don't are children. They've committed some very serious offence, which they'll pay the price for, but they still have to be supported as children. And we want to ensure that when they come out of this, that they can still manage their sentences, they can still manage what's going on psychologically, emotionally, and physically for them. So those are the challenges that we see. As I said, violence against staff, children may be self-harming, but there is some incredible work going on, and we have to really praise all of the people that are doing the work in custody at this time.
Really helpful. Brilliant. Thank you. Lib, some of the challenges that you've seen in your, and just to say, obviously, your role is one which is wide-reaching. It's very high profile. So it'd be interesting just to hear some of the challenges on multiple levels that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, there are some of the kind of challenges that I think are probably obvious, but still doesn't make them any easier to deal with, which is some of the stuff that Derek was reflecting on in terms of, you know, the community groups that really need kind of infrastructure, and that's been even more battered through this particular period, and therefore for us is, you know, how you reach that voice sometimes is a little bit harder, and makes us need to think more. There is something about, you know, the disparity between communities and access people have to digital expression, for want of a better phrase. You know, there's a lot of programs that we've got up and running with, you know, what we think of as the kind of key relationships with young people, either through schools or with youth workers or with parents, all of which of course have been, you know, slightly, or more than slightly altered in terms of the pressures that have come around. But I think probably for me, it's more just this balance that I find quite difficult, which is that I think there's a real desire to keep on going, which we do need to keep on going, delivering some of the stuff we were already doing, albeit with a different kind of lens and different context. I think it is also a period of huge reflection. You know, you talked about, you know, the impact of George Floyd's murder, and that being a seminal moment, I think, and how you really take that on board as an organisation. Something that, you know, we've definitely been challenged and grappling with, and really, really important. And also the isolation of COVID being, you know, something else that you could really spend a lot of time sort of thinking through. And then I suppose there's you know, that kind of personal bit as well, isn't there? You know, we talk a lot about personal relationships or our strategies. I'm somebody who thrives on being in a room with people, throwing around a few ideas, or trying to develop consensus through chairing something, or just feeling inspired by watching things and being part of them. And, you know, we haven't got that in this time at the moment quite. We have a bit, and we have certainly on our screens and some of the things we're engaged in, but it's not as readily available. And I think that's challenging for all of our work, but I think it's also challenging on a personal level. And, you know, I've been very struck by, you know, how much harder it is to communicate effectively with a small team that's still relatively new. Quite a few of whom actually who've, you know, experienced, you know, trauma as a result of COVID, you know, who have suffered bereavements or you know, serious illnesses of their families and friends. So, yeah, I think it's managing that change while keeping on going that's brought out quite a lot of interesting, I think, tensions.
Yeah, thank you. Derek, challenges?
I think on two sides. So on the funders side, it's probably one of trust, in the sense of there are so many relationships that they don't have. And their inability to access communities, which has not just been through the fracture of infrastructure over the last, you know, 10, 12 years, but it is also just, you know, funders tend to be in a bit of a bubble, so they're quite remote from a lot of those issues. So they've relied a lot on sort of intermediaries that they know or that they're comfortable with, who are not at this particular time appropriate to be getting to our communities. So the challenge for us has always been, this is different now, okay? If you're going to get into communities, if you're going to get into grassroots communities, there are tons of organizations that are not on your radar right now, who you need to be engaging with in order to do that. So winning that trust from them has been a challenge, is probably a mild word, mild word for it, because it's felt like hammering your head against a brick wall to say you got to do things differently. And actually, you need to be investing in or speaking to these people, because that intermediary that is going to charge you £1,000,001 for doing another theory of change, of another theory of change, of another theory of change, do not actually know how to reach any of these communities. So there's that bit on that end, which has been a challenge. On the flip side, and you know, we don't work directly with young people, so we're working a lot with organizations, and we're working with a lot of organizations who will not have a website, will not be constituted, will not have any of those structures in place that would enable them to get to emergency funds or to be able to access some of the things that have been available. So, you know, a number of our members do sort of lots of voluntary work and help with fundraising and stuff like that. So there's just that real practical bit on that end, but there's just the care bit on the other end, because most people that I know are just burnt, like completely burnt out, and, you know, are having to manage multiple things while having to deal with, if you're talking with leaders with lived experience, you know, dealing with their own trauma and their own triggers through a lot of this as well. So, you know, part of that conversation has been around, you know, if you're supporting some groups, it's not just about, you know, filling in gaps or core costs and stuff. Where's that additional money for? And this is one of the things you always that you always say, Ben, for supervision, for support, for space, for the things that enable people to be able to do the work. So I'd say those are the two biggest challenges. It's the care bit for the practitioners on the ground, as well as the kind of practical bits. But also on the other side, it's the kind of, okay, this is the new normal for funders. Your relationships now, or the intermediaries or infrastructure bodies you're dealing with now as core partners, will be different going forward, and you don't know them. So how do you build that trust?
Yeah, really helpful. And I think it's really interesting that, you know, in this virtual room, that we've kind of got that almost full circle of practitioners, CEOs of charities and organizations, local or central government kind of expertise, and, you know, City Hall, and then somebody understands those mechanisms. And I think what I've definitely seen is how, like you said, Derek, I suppose one thing I would say about George Floyd and the COVID situation is that it's kind of exposed the Achilles heel of everyone. And I think people are getting found out, whether it's a case of, oh, wow, I can't actually access the funding which is there because, like you said, maybe the constitution isn't quite right, to organizations like not so much like City Hall specifically, but on that level, who are having to ask the question, well, now how do we look at this current situation through a new lens? What is the new normal? And I think that is, it's interesting, and I think it will take time. So let's talk about, if we can, so we can keep it a bit positive and hopeful. Best practice, really, and what have we seen which works in this time? What is there things where we can say, do you know what, actually, in this new world, this new normal of what's going on, there's some really good examples of organisations, charities, local central government, grant funders who are doing that partnership work well. And I think it'd be really helpful for people who are viewing this to kind of hear some ideas and innovation, I suppose. So anybody wants to go first on that, or are you all pessimists and like, no, there's nothing going on which I can even could share? Go on, Derek, go on. You're the hopeful one.
No, I am hopeful, and I guess where I'm hopeful is, so you know, so one, people like you, Ben, right? So very early with the outbreak, you put me on a call that enabled me to be able to get some unbelievable insights from practitioners across the country, and that was invaluable. So people like yourself, people like Ubele Initiative, people like Baljit Sandhu in the Centre for Knowledge Equity, Imi Kaur in Birmingham, who just recently did the Department of Dreams Festival. There are unbelievable people who are already connected with practitioners across the UK that are trusted, and this is really important, trusted by communities and trusted by practitioners who are doing amazing work, and they are doing it voluntarily. They are doing a lot of it above and beyond their own family care, above and beyond all of the stuff that they do. But what I'm seeing is that there is a whole bunch of really strong organizations that have completely stepped up to the plate. As I said, importantly, have the trust of practitioners and communities. So it's been, you know, IMCAN's another organization as well, you know, who I look at and I say, well, these are already considered leaders within within communities across the UK. Actually now, in terms of relationship with funders, that needs to be the next step. But that bit has been wholly positive. I guess the other bit that's been positive that I've seen is things like the Resourcing Racial Justice Fund, which, you know, specifically is funding Black and Brown-led change, has come out. You know, Quanda, which is a fund that's raising money, crowdfunding for Black-led community initiatives. Seeing Black Lives Matter just reached 1 million from their crowdfunder, and I don't even know whether a trust or foundation has ever given a Black-led, Black cause initiative 1 million, but the general public have spoken. You know, Stopwatch, you know, that's holding the police to account in terms of stop and search practices, has also raised a lot. So there's one just really good, innovative, forward-thinking infrastructure that is already there and ready to go and already mobilizing and has the trust of the community. Two, there are pockets. I think Blagrave Trust as well yesterday have just launched a fund for young people to apply for up to, I think, £10,000 for radical visions of change. You know, so you've got all of these, you know, very small but really important funds that's getting money to individuals, unconstituted groups. But I'm just saying to funders, if you don't know how to do it, put money into those organizations or those initiatives, because if they've got the trust of the community and if they can get money to, you know, the type of groups that you can't, give the money to them. You know, so that's the fight. So you've got all of those new organizations doing that sort of stuff. And then I guess my third bit is just faith in young people, because some of the things that young people, you know, and I'm old, right? But some of the things that young people are delivering and innovating and creating at this time, for me, is just like, man, I feel positive about that. So those three things for me feel really, really positive. And I don't think there's an excuse for me in terms of the funders saying we can't or don't or whatever, all of those negative terms, because what we've seen over the last 3 months is so much innovation, good funding initiatives and infrastructure that's created, that there are plenty of people that we can invest in.
Yeah, really helpful. And I'll echo all of that. I mean, I think it feels like it's a new time where some of the locked doors and glass ceilings as a charity, which we've always struggled, have evaporated. Not completely, but a lot of it is kind of like there's easier pathways, and that has been massively helpful for me and other people I know. Andre, what would your kind of I don't know, just best practice examples of things that you've seen which is working really well for you from your perspective?
Yeah, so I wanted to start by just echoing what Derek said, Ben. I think what you've been doing over this whole period and bringing the right voices around the table has been incredible. We've had many, many conversations about what does the trusted network look like. And there are people nationally who are trusted. Sometimes I can be quite reluctant as a chief exec to partner with people just because I think you have to build trust. And I think, you know, it has to, your reputation has to be kind of, you know, DBS checked for various people before you start partnering with certain people. But I think what I've noticed recently is a willingness for power to recognize that individuals like ourselves are specialists within our fields. There's a real willingness for power to say, up until this point, pre-COVID, pre-George Floyd, we thought we understood and we were just making the decisions. But here's an organization, here's individuals who are not only in their practice and lived experience and academically competent. Here are individuals who can actually be the voices that can communicate, as Derek was saying, with the communities who for far too long have had these really disconnected relationships with the major system, the major structures. I'm really pleased that my team are working with children remotely via Zoom. We've introduced children to Zoom. Again, children who are coming home from custody, who had no idea about what it was, helping them to download this onto their laptops. Some of our partners are purchasing laptops for children coming home from custody, which is incredible. And really having a weekly online offender behaviour work with children as they go through this time. We've also been able to ensure that the people around the table who are looking after children coming home, i.e. the Youth Offending Service, probation officers, specific police officers, and various third sector, private and public sector bodies, are doing what they're supposed to be doing for the child. The child shouldn't be coming home from custody, sitting in their house and having nothing to do. Most people are working remotely, so we should be, not bombarding the child, but we should be trying to offer as much support as we can. Communicating with parents, I often speak to parents on Instagram. Parents will direct message me on Instagram and just update me on how their child is doing, how their child's doing in custody, how their child's doing in the community. And I think that that's been great as well. I think one of the best examples for me is keeping my voice out there, Ben, and ensuring that from a media perspective with my PR team, we have a voice which is out there. I'm really passionate about changing the narrative and providing a counter narrative to the idea of me as a black man being a chief executive. I must have been in a gang. I must have been to custody. It's nothing like that. I've been a businessman from 12 years old. There's a different path. So it's really important to use your voice in this time and to ensure that I engage with people like you, Ben, people like you, Lib, and people like you, Derek, in forums like this, where we can say there are specialists out there doing it and they're trusted. They are trusted specialists.
Yeah, really, really helpful. And again, echo everything you're saying. I think it's taken a while for people to kind of get onto that. Like,
yes,
it's almost like whoever shouts the loudest and whoever's got the shiniest website tends to get the money. And it's kind of, I know we've had plenty of conversations with like, how does that even work? And I think people are being forced to look at things differently. So really, really helpful. Lib, your perspective and just kind of best practice and...
Well, my perspective in terms of the hope is definitely around young people. And I've been, really overwhelmed, actually, I think, by the impact of, all of the young people I know actually really adopting the kind of Black Lives Matter. And really feeling that passionately, and that's in a personal, social space as well as in a kind of workspace, although those two things quite often merge. But nonetheless, and I think that provides a lot of hope. There's a huge kind of interest, much more in history, in identity, in potential and in possibility, and I've definitely seen all of that. The second thing is, although I've worked in big bureaucracies, I was a kind of politician for quite a long time, and so I saw myself as an advocate. And I'm not an advocate for a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of process. And the thing about a genuine crisis is it begins to kind of lift the lid off some of that, and it makes the things, like I said earlier on about the digital transformation strategy that's going to take 3 years. This whole process has kind of lifted the lid off a lot of that. And we've got to just keep making sure, and that's really important from my perspective, keep making sure that some of that goes, because some of it is so unnecessary. And it's kind of connected to how people hold power. And that for me is also the really positive thing, is that I do think there have been some incredibly difficult conversations on a personal level within City Hall as well, and within some of the community groups and partnerships that I reach. But they're important conversations. Because they're difficult means they're important. And I do think there is a real opportunity here with the kind of confluence of both, what's happening, what started happening in the States and what is very clearly happening now around Black Lives Matter agenda, but also with the experience of COVID, to really do something different. And, I think Derek's words around the challenge, therefore, to people like myself, actually, and people who've got some kind of either some funding, not huge amounts for those other people on the call, but nonetheless significant levers, significant but also, you know, who has a partnership role, who has a voice to some of the people who are more powerful, is to make sure that that is used in the right way and to keep it real. And how you keep it real in an organisation is quite hard. But, you know, you've given a very good illustration of how important that is, Derek. And therefore, I think, without making it sound exhausting, the kind of challenge needs to be constant. Because, you know, even though we've been only kind of up and running it for a year, and, you know, I hope Ben would attest to the fact that we've tried very hard to do funding in a collaborative way and to try and both marry up some of the bigger funds with the smaller funds. We've got to keep challenging that, because the relationships and the trusted relationships that are out there in the community, you know, are sometimes much more difficult to access, in the sense that, you know, if you're sitting in a particular place, it's harder to access them. Not that it's inherently difficult to access them, because it's not at all, as Derek was saying, but it guards against, I think, a complacency in a traditional way of working, and that is a real challenge in a place like City Hall. In any institution, it's a real challenge, and you know, I think that's hard work looking forward, but it makes it all the more important, actually, is what I think I would say.
Yeah, really helpful, and I will definitely see that. I think obviously your boss Sadiq is somebody who has really pushed for that collaborative, community-led, youth-led approach as well, bringing partners around the table, and I think that is the way forward. And I think what everybody said, I think that, like you said, Andre, part of the problem is that we don't have these forums or conversations enough. And for me, it's always about co-designing and co-produced approaches, and I think this is something going forward. I want to just, I mean, we've got about another.
Ben, can I just, sorry, just to quickly come in there, I just want to really echo something that Andre said about, you know, and it just resonated so much and this is what's important, is the narrative around this, and having a really strong collective narrative around this, because one, there is just this tendency for people to look for individual heroes and isolate them into being the savior for the community and stuff like that, and we can't be going through that route again. And I think that's important to really have that narrative, and also not to label, just because you are a leader who's black or brown, that you are in that street gang. And, you know, there is just this common narrative that really becomes unhelpful. And I think as best possible, the partnership working is also in how that creates that collective narrative, as well as that collective way of supporting each other is nurtured. I think a really important thing. So yeah, it's just, I just really thought that, you know, really.
I think it's a really interesting point, because I think what we've seen too often in our sector, it is those with the, and not just our sector actually, I see it even in a church context, the people who've got the sensationalized stories, which I'm not knocking because it is their stories, but it's kind of like those are the ones which will be highlighted more than the average kind of, actually, no, I wasn't involved in any of that stuff, but what I do have is empathy, compassion, and some lived experience. And I think that has not been valued. I think your point, Derek, about leaders is really interesting, because even in this context, people still are looking for that one person, or, you know, that, you know, I've heard it. Where's the UK's Martin Luther King, and and it's kind of like, yeah, all right, maybe, just maybe, something different is happening where we can have a collective voice, not a monolithic one, but a collective one, where with all the different parts and the different experiences which come with that, but some principles which we all agree on them. And I think that's why, for me, collaboration is always a big thing. I know me and you, Andre, have had lots of conversations about this, but I think for the first time, proper collaboration can work. But like what you're saying, Lib, in my opinion, collaboration can only work if we have also a conversation about power. And I think this is why, Derek, what you're doing, and others, like even Charity So White, those guys, and what you are bringing to the table is actually trying to redistribute decision making and power. And I think, you know, it's a good thing. So we've got about 15 minutes left. And, you know, this is the moment where if you're listening and you've got any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. You've got a wealth of experience with, you know, I won't try and add up all the years because that's a comparison, but there's a wealth of experience here. But if there's any questions around partnership, I mean, if no one's got anything, one thing I would like to ask very quickly, and people have got a bit of time to think about this, if you are, like you've always, you know, differently, you've expressed this, let's say you are an organisation which might not have all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed, you know, but you know that you're doing some significant work. What advice would you give, I suppose? And I suppose anybody can answer that question, but we do know that there's so many. I always say, you want to know who's doing the real work, go and spend some time in the community. And I always say to people, go and spend some time in the community. Ask the community, who are the people who's turning up and really providing. But what advice would you give in this world where it feels like at times crabs in a bucket? When, and I think I said this to you, Derek, you know, when all this funding came out, it was like, whoa, okay, organizations I've never heard of were suddenly like, yeah, I'm steaming in. So what, any advice you can give to people who are kind of in this period, like, I don't even know where to start. It's big, it's challenging.
So if I can jump in, so people contact me of all ages and all ethnicities, right, and say, look, I want to do something. So I'm thinking about starting a charity. I want to do something, but I don't know where to start and what to do. And then people who are already running organizations, like you say, some people are chasing, you know, funding, various different funding pots. I think the collaborative approach is the key thing that we need right now. I think that we need to have a almost like a tiered system led by some of the older academics and the older practitioners who have been in the field for 30, 40, 50 years, who can lead and then communicate down to the next tier, which is where I see myself and you, Ben, the practitioners and the chief execs who are coming up behind them. And then we can then communicate that to the 20-year-olds who are, you know, really passionate about setting an organization up, or they've just started working in an organization and they're thinking, where do I put my energy? We have the we have the lived experience. We understand what burnout is. We understand what, you know, you see in occupational health therapist is. We understand about secondary trauma. We understand how an individual can come into this kind of work and within 5 years may be suffering from mental health issues. So I think it's really important that we build a system that, as I said, is led by some of our peers, the academics and the elders who have gone before us. It's led by myself and you, Ben, and various people at our level nationally. And then we can influence the younger ones coming up. We need that structure so that I can look back. You know, I'm 41. I want to make sure that by the time I'm 61, in my, you know, in 20 years' time, I can look back and say, thank God now we have a research tradition around the work we do. We have established pathways for getting funding. There are organizations who are strong within their field. There are consortiums which go and speak to the government from a position of trust, a position of being able to prove what they can do, so people know who to go to for what. Does that make sense? I think it's still a little bit messy, and we just need a little bit more structure to tidy it up. People shouldn't be embarrassed if they've just come into the sector. People shouldn't be going for £100,000 if you've just started. It's okay to just take your time and contact people like us and say, what do I do? How do I keep myself sane?
Yeah. I think that's a brilliant point. And I think, so in my experience, and I think it works both ways, I think we all need a bit of humility and just be able to, if we need help, don't be afraid to ask for it. I think also, and I think this is what is happening in a way I've not seen before, we need some people who have been in the game a little bit longer to connecting with the younger. So one of the things we do at Power to Fight, if you notice, that we've got a whole range of people we're working with. Now, some of them will deliver, but a lot of it for me is just putting an arm around them if they want it, and just be like, okay, I'm seeing you here, I'm seeing you there. What can I do to support you?
Yeah.
Because, you know, and maybe Derek, you'd attest to this as well, but I know with me and you, Andre, we never had that.
No.
When we were doing, you know, youth offending all those years ago. So for me, and maybe this is the pastor in me, but I definitely want to be in a position where we can, you know, just make sure, because I also don't want to be doing this when I'm 61.
No.
I'll be doing something else, you know what I mean? So, you know, it works both ways. Anybody else want to comment on that? I've got one question come through, but anybody else would like to comment on just advice for people and all that type of stuff?
Yeah, just to agree, because I just think that process, and again, I think Imi Kaur was doing this a lot in Birmingham, in terms of she has this huge community of people who are doing some amazing stuff. And it's like, you know, no one can build that level of trust that she's already had with that community. So somewhere along the line, it's like, you know, and she knows how to manage power dynamics as well. So, you know, it's that thing which says, how do you accelerate through community so the next generation has that layer of support, but also not just that layer of support, also that they can be more assertive than the current or previous generations, because that's where my faith comes in with the young'uns. The young'uns are like, nah, Derek, man, you were too patient on that, man. You were just too, you were too laid back. You would try to do the play. And I guess that's part of generational thing of, oh my God, you know, I can't go in a certain way. I can't, you know, and actually you think, boy, was that an effective way of doing it? Was the percentages of gain strong enough? And then I have to look in the mirror and say, boy, I made a ton of mistakes around that. And actually what you need to do is find ways of just passing on the good stuff that you might have done, as well as the bad stuff that you have done. And again, my generation, I would always say that our ability to do the self-care bit was whack, you know, and our ways of managing the good stuff that you're doing with personal lives was often very messy. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that actually, if you've got that intergenerational link to say, and that honesty and that trust to be able to hand that on, I think it's so invaluable, so that next generation are learning, but doing it their way, not on the dictating, oh, this is how you need to do it. It's got to be on the sense of take it or leave it, but here's what we did right, here's the things that we didn't do so well, but let them lead and move the way forward.
Really, really helpful. I'm going to bring you in a minute, Lib. There's a question which has come in from Karen. I suppose it's to me, but I'm going to open it up. You made the statement, collaboration only works when you talk about power. Please could you elaborate on that and maybe suggest how we might go about initiating such conversations in a gracious way with someone who may not be keen on sharing said power? So I think what we are seeing in our nation is something which is unprecedented, in the sense that power dynamics are being challenged. The traditional ways, like Derek has articulated, in how decisions are being made, how money is being distributed, what is prioritized, is being absolutely challenged to its core. And therefore, I suppose what I've seen is there's two types of people. There's people who are like, do you know what, whether it's a selfish reason, I need to cover my back, but we're open to having some conversations, or it's like, no, I'm going to resist this. And I can't predict what the future is going to look like, but what I am seeing is that it does come down to who is prepared to relinquish some power and who is prepared to collaborate. Now, I think this is why I'll bring you in, Lib. I think one of the things about City Hall is that I think there's always been an opportunity to bring people like myself and others in around the table. And I don't get to make a decision about where the money's spent, but one thing I do get to do is at least challenge some stuff and just say, do you know what? Do you know where actually the real hurt and pain is in the community? Now, that's not something which always happens. And so I think that's something which I'll commend you guys on. But I think even beyond that, I think now the conversation about how can your money or how can your influence really specifically, directly impact where the most need is. And I think that's the type of conversations. Now, how you do that, I think personally for me, some of the conversations I've had is, you know, either get on board this train which is going, or you'll get left behind.
Absolutely.
And that's the kind of level of conversations I now have with people where I'm saying, listen, maybe prior to this, we've had the same conversation and you've not listened. Now look at how the world is going. And therefore, you've got an opportunity to not be a savior, but you've got an opportunity to be an ally and to step forward and say, do you know what, actually, we take this seriously, whatever your motives are. And I think that's what I would say, Karen, from my perspective. So I don't know if anybody else has got anything to add on that.
I suppose, yeah, I mean, if I could sort of wrap that into the previous, well, maybe the previous question actually, but I think I completely agree with you, Ben, that now is the moment to challenge that. And I suppose it does come back to the point I was raising earlier on, that that's a constant challenge. And I think that has to start with a humility and a real ability to listen, but it's got to go way beyond that. It's got to go into genuine change in practice and real action. And I think it is hard on all of us. Of course, it's particularly hard in the structures we've got at the moment, where the power imbalance is such as it is, for people more in authority to be able to let go, listen genuinely, and take some risk. We haven't talked about risk much, but it will feel like risk, abandoning some process, even though maybe it shouldn't, but it will do. That's one thing. But I also think there is something I was going to make the point in the earlier session, and that's where the fundamental challenge rests, is that people with that power do need to listen and do need to act accordingly. And that means letting go of how they feel or how the world has been. Hard, but important. But I also think there is a challenge in what I would call sometimes in the community sector out there, where you develop quite quickly a kind of founder syndrome around organisations, where people can't let go because it was their project. And unfortunately, I've seen more actually in my previous role as leader of Lambeth, but I saw so many fantastic initiatives start up. But within a council for 18 years, you saw where they kind of reached their natural shelf life. And rather than hand on the reins to someone, the person stuck on in there because they felt that was their power base. So while I think it's a fundamental challenge to those in power, and I completely agree with the points that you're making, I also think it's a challenge to all of us individually, actually, about how we exercise ourselves in whatever role we're in. Because that whole point about bringing people forward kind of connects up to the point that Andre was making earlier on, which was also around the sustainability of efforts. And making sure that there's some real long-term challenge. And
I agree. I think as much as the conversation is about power, I think the word sustainability. So from a power to fight perspective, I'm not really interested in short-term projects anymore. I'm interested in system change, and that sustainable change and that long-term change, which is going to really impact some of the systemic and structural problems that we've got in society. But I know, and Andre probably hope you back me up on this, I can remember when there was a shift in thinking around youth work from like 2007, 2008 in comparison to where we are now. Nobody was talking about trauma-informed care and services back in those days. Nobody was talking about contextual safeguarding. Nobody was talking about clinical supervision for practitioners. Now, unfortunately, some of us, some practitioners we know are still not on that kind of language and trajectory, and unfortunately, like you're kind of alluding to, Lib, they've become obsolete. And I think and therefore I think there is a conversation within our own sector, with our own people, to say, listen, the game is changing, And I think that's a really important point. Derek, just on this, and I've got one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Anything you'd like to just add?
Yeah, just really quickly. I think the bit where the new normal comes into play is the bit that says you don't just do a 3-year grant, you do a 5+ year grant, and you don't do project funding, you do core costs, and you don't just do core costs, you add a 10% top-up funding that provides not just for supervision but also for succession. Because one of the things, and I agree with Lib here, in that having funded for years, I've seen so many founders, doing fantastic work, but then their organizations going into the massive transition, but also recognizing that they don't know where they would go to next. Because where do you go? If you're an entrepreneur, then you start up another business, and your success is built because it's market driven on money. In the social sector, it's really tough to go on to that next thing and climb up again when it's not you know, strictly a money base and stuff. So there is things that can be done going forward that can really facilitate better care succession for people that are delivering. But yeah, I also agree that, you know, look, from a perspective of commissioners and funding, somewhere along the line, for this to work, there needs some power that's given up in order for this to work. And this is the time to do it, because as I think someone said recently, you'll just be on the wrong side of history if you're not doing it at this particular time. Yeah.
Really helpful. Andre, there's one question which I'm going to see if you can answer in 30 seconds.
Yes, and go ahead.
I'm due to connect to communities. This is from Sarah in GP surgeries for partnership and integrated working for our young people. What is one piece of advice you could offer to get the maximum out of these conversations? And I only say this because I know there's some stuff that you have done in the past in this way. So any quick advice you can give to Sarah?
God, look, it's something that's been ringing in my mind straight away, is this concept of the self-assigned impossible task. So many people come into this industry wanting to be heroes. So many people come into this industry wanting to be, you know, the change. And I think we've just been speaking about it. An individual cannot do it. But also, you have to look after yourself, all right? You have to ensure you have rest days, ensure you have time with your family, with your networks, ensure that you compensate yourself properly so that you can live comfortably and you're able to then deliver the work without thinking, how am I going to pay my phone bill? How am I going to pay my gas bill? Those things get in the way of being able to be productive. Ensure that you seek out support. I have clinical supervision twice a month. I constantly speak to people who have been before me. I constantly speak to people in positions of power. And somebody will say, look, what do you want from me? I don't necessarily need 100 grand. Can I have an hour meeting with you? Because in that meeting, I'm going to get some information from you about how I can shape my organization moving forward. Also, know when you're coming to your point where you are beginning to reach the point where you're not taking any new information in. Don't be scared to learn. Don't be scared to take a break academically and disappear for 3 years, you know, and go and fill yourself up with knowledge. Lived experience will only take you so far. After a certain point, you're going to need to be able to have conversations which can only come from doing your own research and putting yourself in uncomfortable places. I thrive on putting myself in places where I'm the only one. I'm generally the only person around the table that looks like me, but I enjoy it because it stretches me and I get to learn. I'm also very, you know, competent in working with private, public, and third sector. I've been doing it from a very young age, and it's having those skills which are transferable. I know what I'm good at, but I also know my weaknesses. So I go to people like Ben, I go to, you know, elders, I go to people in the private sector and I say, look, this is what I'm really good at, but I need a really great lawyer right now. I need a really great accountant right now. Not just an accountant, but one of the specialist ones. And it's okay to get that support. So I don't know if that specifically answered the question, but I'm really passionate about people looking after themselves, people not trying to assign themselves this task that I'm going to stop people offending forever. There's never going to be any more serious youth violence. Things may happen. And you may, as you get older, things may still be going on, but just do what you can do within your time and pass the baton on.
No, it's really helpful. And I think what I'd say to Sarah is that you're in this position where your GP surgeries and whatever it is are having to look at how they're engaging with young people and communities differently. So you've got an open door. And I think that's something really important. And I think you need to also be bringing the young people's experiences into this conversation as well. It's like Andre said, you're not trying to be a superhero, you're not trying to be a martyr. You're basically saying, listen, this is the realities of what's going on in the streets. You know, just on that, I know plenty of young people who do not go to the GP.
Absolutely.
And even that alone should make a GP passionate to try and make something like that change and stop. And you know, so I think it's really helpful. Guys, I'm going to close there because I don't want to be over time. I want to thank you all for your time. You're very busy, very influential people, and I want to thank you for coming on to our conference. I really do appreciate your knowledge and your wisdom. I have the utmost respect for all of you in different ways. What I'll say to people, I'll just see if I can just share the screen. We've still got, so next Thursday, we've got another 4 sessions. You lucky people, another 4 sessions. We've got keeping young people safe in isolation with Craig Pinkney, which would be brilliant. They're all brilliant. We've got parenting in isolation with a clinical psychologist called John Reese. We've got online safety for young people with Ray Douglas. And then we've got well-being and mental health in isolation with Whitney Isles. So I mean, if you know these names, it's pretty much we brought the dream team of people together. And all you need to do is sit with a cup of tea in front of your screen. So if you're around, brilliant. Thank you guys, really appreciate your time. And as I always say, Power to Fight is a charity. So if you do feel like you'd like to donate some of the pound coins in your car, we will be happy to take them. But also there are some brilliant organisations out there, such as Liminality Group, and a lot of things which Derek is involved in as well. This will be up, this will be recorded, this is recorded to be up, and you can go back over it and the slides will come out. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Appreciate it, guys. Nice one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice one.
Cheers.